Have you ever looked at the news and asked yourself, why does the Middle East seem to be in a constant state of conflict? I mean, this region gave birth to some of the world's oldest civilizations and three of the world's major religions. So why is it so often associated with war and unrest? Why do we still see clashes between Israel and Palestine or deep divisions between Sunni and Shia Muslims, even though they share the same faith? And why do Muslim-majority nations seem to be caught in cycles of violence? It turns out there might be an ancient answer, not from modern politics or news cycles, but from the Bible. To understand the roots of these tensions, we have to rewind thousands of years to a dry, wind-swept desert where a young woman named Hagar lived. She wasn't royalty, she wasn't a prophet, just a servant in the household of Abram and Sarai, later known as Abraham and Sarah. Now, here's the situation. Sarah couldn't have children, and in that time, that was considered a heavy burden, especially when carrying on the family name and legacy was so important. So Sarah came up with a plan. She gave Hagar to her husband Abram to bear a child for them. It was a cultural practice back then, but as you can imagine, it made things really complicated. When Hagar became pregnant, instead of celebration, tension exploded in the household. Jealousy and resentment brewed. Sarah mistreated Hagar so badly that the pregnant servant ran away, alone, scared, and wandering through the wilderness. But then, something incredible happened. In the middle of the desert by a spring of water, an angel of the Lord appeared to Hagar. And the message? It was no ordinary comfort. It carried a prophecy, one that would shape history for millennia to come. The angel told her, "You are now pregnant and will give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. And he will live in hostility toward all his brothers." That's from Genesis 16, 11 through 12. Let that sink in for a moment. A wild donkey of a man. In the ancient world, wild donkeys weren't just animals. They symbolized raw, untamed freedom, fierce independence, a refusal to be broken or controlled. They roamed freely, often stubborn and unpredictable. So when the angel used that image to describe Ishmael, it wasn't an insult. It was a warning, a mark, that his descendants would live outside the bounds of traditional society, hard to tame, fiercely independent, and yes, frequently in conflict. And then came the second part of the prophecy. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. That's not just describing one man's attitude. It's laying out the blueprint for generations of conflict. Ishmael and his descendants would live in tension, opposition to others, and constant internal struggle too. And then the angel said, he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. And that's the part that takes this from personal to global. You see, Ishmael's brothers weren't just his immediate family. They were Isaac and his line, the children of Abraham through Sarah. And from Isaac's lineage came the Jewish people, through whom both Christianity and Islam would eventually trace their spiritual roots. So this isn't just a family story. It's the setup for one of the longest-running and most intense rivalries in human history. This moment in the desert wasn't just a turning point for Hagar, it was a turning point for the world. Because Ishmael, though not the child of God's covenant with Abraham and Sarah, was still Abraham's son. And that created a spiritual tension between the child of promise, Isaac, and the firstborn Ishmael. And that tension wouldn't just stay in their home, it would grow into something much, much bigger. So let's talk about Isaac for a second. Isaac was born later as a miracle to Sarah in her old age.
He was the fulfillment of God's covenant with Abraham, the promise that Abraham's descendants would become a great nation and that through them all nations would be blessed. God made it clear the covenant would pass through Isaac, not Ishmael. That didn't mean God rejected Ishmael. Far from it. In fact, he promised to bless him too, to make his descendants into a great nation, but it wouldn't be the same promise, and it wouldn't be the same path. That's where the divide begins. What we have is one father, two sons, two promises, and a legacy of spiritual, cultural, and political rivalry. Ishmael's descendants would become the Arab peoples. Isaac's descendants would form the Jewish people. And the rift between them, it wasn't just about geography or resources. It was spiritual, deep, and it was prophetic. Now fast forward a bit. Ishmael had 12 sons, according to Genesis 25. These sons became leaders of tribes, proud, fierce, independent. They lived as nomads, roaming the deserts of Arabia. They built powerful cultures, rich in history and tradition. But often they were also at war with each other and with those around them. That prophecy about his hand being against everyone, it kept echoing through history. Meanwhile, Isaac's line, through his son Jacob, who's renamed Israel, became the 12 tribes of Israel. Their story, chronicled throughout the Bible, is filled with divine encounters, exiles, returns, and the deep covenantal relationship with God. They were chosen to inherit the promised land, and their path was marked by both suffering and hope. Now imagine these two family trees growing side by side, overlapping, sometimes intermarrying, sometimes fighting, sometimes sharing space, often at odds. And then came the birth of new religions. Judaism, of course, continued through Isaac's line. Christianity emerged from the same roots but centered around Jesus Christ. And then in the 7th century CE, Islam arose. And this time it traced its spiritual lineage through Ishmael, honoring him and Hagar as foundational figures. You'd think this shared ancestry would bring unity, right? But instead, the old rivalries resurfaced in new forms. And that's just the beginning.
So, by the time Islam rose to power in the 7th century, the descendants of Ishmael had already become a vast and widespread group across the Arabian Peninsula. With the rise of the Prophet Muhammad, who is traditionally believed to be a descendant of Ishmael, the Arab tribes united under one faith, one purpose, and rapidly expanded across regions that had once been ruled by empires like the Romans and Persians. But even within this powerful new unity, division still crept in. Not long after the death of Muhammad, a major split formed within Islam. It was about leadership. Who should guide the Muslim community going forward? Some believed it should be a close companion of the Prophet, while others argued it must come from his bloodline. This disagreement became the foundation of the Sunni and Shia divide, a divide that has led to centuries of tension, distrust, and unfortunately, bloodshed. Now, think back to the prophecy again. He will live in hostility toward all his brothers. That wasn't just about Isaac and Ishmael anymore. It now echoed within Ishmael's own descendants, brother against brother, even within the same faith. The Sunni-Shia split isn't just a theological debate, it's a deep wound that affects entire nations. We see it in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Bahrain, and especially in the devastating war in Yemen, where a Shia-aligned group fights against a Sunni-led coalition. The result? Humanitarian disaster, famine, displacement, and echoes of that ancient family fracture. And then there's Israel. This is where the story gets even more intense and deeply emotional for so many. After centuries of exile, persecution, and wandering, the Jewish people returned to their ancestral land in the 20th century, establishing the modern state of Israel in 1948. For Jews, it was the fulfillment of promises made thousands of years ago,
a return home. But for many Arabs, especially the Palestinians, it was experienced as a massive loss, a displacement. Generations have grown up in refugee camps, caught between political promises and broken realities. The wars of 1948, 1967, and beyond have left deep scars. And again, we hear the prophecies echo. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. It's not about choosing sides here. It's about seeing the spiritual layers beneath the politics. Jerusalem, this small city with outsized significance, is a flashpoint. It's sacred to Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike. But for Jews, it's tied to the covenant with Isaac. For Muslims, it's a city blessed through Ishmael's lineage and home to one of Islam's holiest sites. For Christians, it's where Jesus walked, died, and rose again. So when people ask, why can't we just solve this with a peace treaty, the answer isn't so simple. Because this isn't just about land, it's about legacy, identity, divine promise. And that's why the conflict often feels intractable. It's not just about borders, it's about belonging. And yet, here's the paradox. Even though Ishmael's story is marked by conflict, it's also marked by blessing. When Hagar and her son were sent away, God didn't leave them to die. He met them in the desert, He heard their cries, and He made a promise. In Genesis 17:20, God says to Abraham, "As for Ishmael, I have heard you. I will surely bless him. I will make him fruitful and will greatly increase his numbers. He will be the father of 12 rulers, and I will make him into a great nation." So we can't overlook this. Ishmael's line was never cursed. It was blessed. Not in the same way as Isaac's covenant, but still blessed. God saw him. God provided for him. God gave him a future. And we see that blessing in the richness of Arab culture, in art, in language, in architecture, in poetry, in scientific innovation during the Islamic Golden Age. Ishmael's legacy is not just war and unrest. It's also beauty, resilience, brilliance, and survival against the odds. That wild donkey spirit, it's not only about conflict, it's about freedom, independence, the refusal to be enslaved or silenced. And while it comes with its struggles, it also comes with strength. And that's important to recognize. But here's the deeper question. If all of this started with a family, Abraham, Hagar, Sarah, Isaac, and Ishmael, is there still hope for healing in this family line? Or are we doomed to repeat the pain forever? The Bible doesn't just stop at prophecy, it moves toward redemption. Yes,
Now let's bring it all home. We followed the story from the deserts of ancient Canaan to the crowded streets of modern-day Jerusalem. From a single family torn apart by jealousy and divine promises, to entire nations and faiths shaped by that legacy. But here's the question that lingers. Is this cycle of conflict unbreakable? Or is there a deeper hope hidden within the same divine story that began it all? Let's return to Genesis 17 for a second. God told Abraham, "As for Ishmael, I have heard you." That matters, because it wasn't just Abraham who loved Ishmael. God did too. God heard. God blessed. God made him into a great nation. That promise stands. It's not a mistake. It's part of the plan. And yet, the pain, the rivalry, the wars, the suspicion, the religious divide continues. Why? Because the world we live in is broken, not just politically, spiritually. The descendants of Isaac and Ishmael, Jews, Arabs, and everyone in between, carry with them the weight of centuries, generational trauma, deep stories, unhealed wounds. But here's where everything turns. The Bible tells us that Jesus Christ came not just for one nation, not just for the children of Isaac, but for all people, including the descendants of Ishmael. He came to do what no treaty, no human leader, no political movement could do.
He came to heal the oldest wounds. Isaiah 9:6 calls him the Prince of Peace, and not just peace in a general sense, but peace that breaks the cycles of hatred, bitterness, revenge, and fear, peace that reconciles enemies and transforms hearts. You see, the hope of Jesus is not just a religious idea, it's a solution to the deepest human problem: separation from God and from each other. And the message of the gospel isn't about replacing identities, it's about redeeming them. To the children of Ishmael, there is no exclusion. Jesus came for you too, not to erase your history, not to deny your legacy, but to offer something even greater: peace with God and peace with your brothers. In Christ, there are no longer boundaries based on ancestry. The Apostle Paul wrote in Ephesians that Jesus broke down the dividing wall of hostility, making one new humanity out of two, reconciling both to God through the cross. That's not just theology, that's transformation. And what about the fighting, the decades of war, the bitterness passed down through generations? Here's the hard truth: peace won't come from politics alone. It won't come from another summit. It won't come from just drawing new lines on a map. Real peace only comes when hearts change, when people are willing to forgive, to listen, to love. And that can only happen through Jesus. The same Bible that spoke of conflict also speaks of reconciliation. The same God who allowed the desert to shape Ishmael's journey also sent his Son to offer living water to all who thirst, no matter their ancestry, no matter their past. And yes, we know it's hard. We know the pain runs deep, but the gospel is deeper still. Imagine for a moment, what if the descendants of Isaac and Ishmael could stand side by side, not in hatred, but in healing, not in suspicion, but in solidarity? Imagine Arabs and Jews, Sunnis and Shias, Christians and Muslims, seeing each other not as enemies, but as human beings made in the image of God. It sounds impossible, but it starts with one heart at a time. It starts with turning from anger, from generational hate, and saying, there must be something more. And there is. His name is Jesus. He doesn't erase our history. He redeems it. He doesn't call us to forget the past, but to be healed from it. He doesn't ask us to deny our culture, but to let love be the center of it. So what does all this mean for us? It means that the ancient prophecy spoken to Hagar, the one that predicted struggle, independence, and conflict, is not the end of the story. It's the setup for redemption, a redemption available not through politics, not through power, but through peace, the kind of peace that only God can give. The descendants of Ishmael have a place in God's plan, not as outsiders, but as beloved, not as cursed, but as called. And that calling can be fulfilled, not through war, but through Christ, because in him former enemies become brothers, and ancient wounds can finally begin to heal. So maybe the reason these prophecies still echo through our modern headlines is because God is still calling out, still offering hope to all who will listen, not just to Isaac's children, not just to Ishmael's, but to all of us. That's the deeper truth behind the conflict, and it's the only path forward. If this moved you, if it opened your eyes, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, talk about it, and let it lead you to the Prince of Peace. Music softly fades in, because the story of Ishmael and Isaac, it's not over. It's still being written, and maybe, just maybe, you're part of the next chapter.